A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. What is the scariest, most bone-chilling moment you have ever witnessed, or have been told in your life? My father is a physician, has been in practice for 30 years, and has literally seen tens of thousands of patients. One day a few years back he goes to see a woman who has been admitted to the hospital the previous day for a serious lung condition. He enters her hospital room in the morning. The woman is heavily sedated and there is a nurse fixing her bed and cleaning the room. Immediately upon entering, my father gets a severe allergic reaction, feels he can barely breathe and tears start rolling from his eyes. The nurse stands and helps him back into the hallway. After Dad finally recovers and apologizes to the nurse, says, "That's so weird, that only happens when I get close to cats." The nurse goes white as a ghost. It turns out that the hospitalized woman had been awake all night, screaming that cats were crawling all over her body and trying to scratch out her eyes. The hospital staff believed she was simply having a weird reaction to some medication, and after hours of her terrified screaming they were able to medicate her to sleep. There is probably a logical explanation for the whole situation, but I remember finding the account bone-chilling when I first heard the story. Scariest moment, I was about 16 or so and on my way to help decorate for a school dance. A buddy and me decide to go get some snacks and drinks for everyone and he's driving his hatchback Camaro, 90s model. About halfway down the road, while heading back with the snacks, we are coming around a fairly sharp right curve and halfway through the curve a truck comes blasting toward us half on our side of the road. My friend swerves and overcorrects a few times until we are heading semi-straight on the road, not realizing we are still sliding a bit toward the ditch. He tries to save it and we hit the ditch on the driver's side still moving fairly quickly. The last thing I remember before blacking out was us in mid-air careening into the ditch. The car was mangled and upside down facing the opposite direction we were heading and both of us are hanging upside down in out seats. He's still unconscious and his head is tilted sideways against the roof. I had to crawl through the broken window on the back hatch because the doors were crushed. There was a man standing across the road who just happened to live right across from where we crashed. He said we hit the ditch, flipped and the top of the car was crushed on a tree before rolling back down into the ditch upside down. I had a mild concussion and he cracked a bone in his neck, but wasn't paralyzed. We were lucky as hell. I still get nervous when riding as a passenger. Most bone-chilling, the day I had to use all the training in CPR I never imagined I'd ever need. Working at a grocery store, I heard a woman screaming about something in one of the aisles. Another woman comes running toward the front panicked and asking if anyone knew CPR as some guy collapsed and wasn't breathing. I closed my lane with people still in the line and met a pharmacist who works there halfway to the guy. The two of us were the only ones who were trained in CPR and we worked for about 30 minutes switching out every few minutes when one of us got exhausted. A lady came back a few days later to the shop and told us she was a relative of his and that he didn't make it. But thanked us for trying so hard to keep him alive until the paramedics got there. I still remember it like it's fresh in my mind. Already mentioned this one once on here, but I witnessed someone committing suicide on the highway when they jumped in front of a semi. Didn't even see a body, just blood splattering everywhere, including on my car. Second thing would have to be witnessing my grandparents dying. People always say, I heard their last breath as if it were some gentle sigh or something. Not even fucking close. Listening to someone's last breaths is the most horrific sound I've ever heard. Just thinking of it again gives me shivers. I never thought I would share this story with total strangers, but here it goes. So my mother's sister and I lived in a small apartment. An important thing to note is that my mother was a psychiatrist. She lost her license for attempting to kill a patient, so she had a very large collection of painkillers, psychedelics, and more. So it was my sister's 13th birthday party and my mother decided to down an entire bottle of cough syrup, enough vodka to kill most people, and probably something else. It gets to be about 11 at night and my sister started making plans for her and her friends to sleep in the living room. At this point my mother starts trying to hit on some of her friends and demands to sleep right next to them. My sister says no and gets slapped across the face so hard I could hear it clear through my bedroom door. Next thing I know my sister has grabbed the phone telling me to call the cops and my father while she starts barricading my door with her body. "I will burn this whole house down if I have to," get screamed at us as my mother breaks my door with a large knife in her hand. All I had time to do was tell the cops we needed police at our address before she points the knife at me all tells me to give her the phone. My sister then grabs the phone screaming for help as my mother grabs her by the throat and picks her up and presses her against my window. Lucky for us the police station was about a 5-minute walk from our home so the cops were there after about 10 minutes of our little bedroom standoff. As soon as we saw the cops' lights out the window my mom dropped my sister and sealed herself off in her room. I have never been able to forget the look in her eyes as she pointed the knife at me. It still gives me nightmares years later. I would say we got a happy ending, but my dad was about the same as my mom, so my sister and I got split up and we both ended up homeless. I found some very good friends I now call family to take me in, but my sister was not so lucky. I have not seen her in about a year now because her husband is abusing her even though she says he is perfect. When I was around 8 I got on a roller coaster at Six Flags in Houston. It had those foam-covered bars that locked over your shoulders and a small seat to sit on, but the feet dangled. About a minute into the ride, it starts twisting. I slip halfway out of the seat and almost out of the seatbelt, that was supposed to be checked for security beforehand, but wasn't tight enough. I spent the entire ride digging my little nails into the foam padding on the shoulder bars while the edge of the seat was digging into my back. My mom was sitting next to me and noticed what was happening. All she could reach was my shirt and held on to that for the ride. I haven't been on a coaster since. For the abusive asshole that he was, my dad did go through some shit. Not sure how the conversation came about, but my mom ended up telling me this story. Back in 1992, a lot of people didn't give a fuck about seatbelt safety, and even actively rallied against it. Well, one young mother learned the hard way why wearing seatbelts is important. My dad drives a semi-truck as a cross-country deliveryman. He was cruising down the highway, when all of a sudden this car randomly swerves out of its lane into a head-on collision with my dad's truck. If you've ever seen the aftermath of a car-on semi-collision, you know how this is going to turn out. Miraculously, the mother lived. Her mother, the little girl's grandma, died, perhaps from impact or maybe had a heart attack. But the worst part was that the mother wasn't considerate enough to buckle up her 5-year-old daughter in the back of the car, and upon impact the little girl went flying through the windshield and didn't hit the ground for a solid 10 feet. She was dead on impact. And now that woman has to live for the rest of her life knowing that one simple inaction is the reason her daughter is dead. Wear your seatbelt, please. Was goofing around free climbing some boulders on the top of a gorge with friends and I slipped. I remember rolling and coming finally to a stop about 40 feet from the edge. Still freaks me out, sometimes I dream about it. It also freaks me out thinking about my friends and if I had gone over. School shooting at my high school. I was fine, but when the police evacuated us out of the school they kinda walked us right through the area where it started. There was a lot of blood pretty much everywhere. They hadn't moved one of the bodies out either and had covered him up with a blanket, but we knew. Man, that shit sucked. That image of the school sticks with me and it's been almost 20 years now. This happened a month ago when I picked up my sister from a party. I was driving home and along the way I see this black car doing 15 miles per hour, flashing brake lights, turning on the left indicator signal but making a right. Impatient, I decides to illegally cut him off and just go home. But after I did it, he begins to speed up and flash his fog lights, signaling me to pull over. I just kept driving out, being creeped out. My house was a couple of miles away with a lot of turns, but this guy kept tailgating me and pursuing me, which was getting pretty scary. I literally drive 50 miles in the radius of maybe 10 miles trying to get him off me. I finally made a left turn where he couldn't follow or risk hitting another car. I quickly pulled over and turned off all my lights, only to see the car slowly drive by as I hold my breath hoping he doesn't spot me. After about 15 minutes I look around and slowly drive home. My sister was drunk and asleep, so she basically didn't even know what happened. I once witnessed the aftermath of a bar fight. One small drunk guy kept pushing a large sober guy for no apparent reason. Large guy knocked him out with one punch, but from what I heard it was a vicious punch. I found the man laying between two pool tables. He had hit his head pretty bad when he fell back. It was bleeding. He was completely out, wouldn't respond to any of my attempts to wake him up as we waited on the ambulance. The way he was breathing was the most disturbing thing I had ever seen. His body was on survival mode to keep his lungs pumping air. It was hard, forceful breathing. Blood pouring from his mouth because several of his teeth had been knocked out. When EMS finally came and took him away, I couldn't even look at him any longer, just to see someone in such a helpless state. The poor man even pissed himself. I found out later he had to be life-flighted to a larger hospital because he had bleeding on the brain. But he has apparently recovered and still up to his old ways. I never want to see someone like that ever again. Creepiest moment. Patrolling an empty warehouse and my radio goes off and it's like a sort of demonic gibberish, and the lights shut off. And I remember thinking, oh fuck no, I ain't being in a horror movie tonight. Beelined it for the door, would have had to leave anyways to use my phone to call in the power outage. Later figured it was probably an electrical issue of some sort, causing radio interference and a power outage. Worked alone during those hours, so not a prank from someone else. My friend's cousin disappeared. That's it. She just disappeared one day, without a trace. No signs, no clues, no piece of evidence that would lead them to the kidnapper of this young girl. She wasn't much older than her young teens, if I remember right. That's what makes it scariest, in my opinion. It could have easily been my friend kidnapped. It could have easily been me. It could have been another girl in another town. It's been at least 10 years of nothing. No body, still no evidence. She's just gone. Edit for words and adding some stuff. This happened in Texas. Around 7 to 10 years ago, it never really made the news as far as I know. I was told about the disappearance about 5 years ago, and my friend only mentioned her cousin a few times in passing after that. I don't want to reopen any wounds by asking my friend about it, because they were practically sisters from how close they were. Apologies for not being able to provide more information. During Katrina, I lived just outside Jackson, Mississippi. My grandmother and cousin that lived on the coast had come up to stay with us. We figured we'd be fine since no hurricane had done very much that far north. The storm had picked up pretty bad and we were in the carport looking at the pine trees across the street bend. We kept saying how they were about to fall. We went back inside and I started to listen to music on my CD player pretty loud. Out of nowhere I see something pink and foamy fall from the ceiling and land on my cousin's face. She screams louder than anyone I've ever heard before. I look to my dad and see him mouth, "Run." I get up, look behind me, and see a tree branch not 1 foot behind where my head had just been, sticking through the window. The giant oak tree in our backyard had fallen on our house. The only reason I'm alive is that the tree was forked and fell in just the right way to wedge itself on our chimney. When I almost got kidnapped while walking home around 9 p.m. A white van, how fitting, slowly drove behind me, then stopped about 500 feet in front of me, then turned around. I sprinted in the opposite direction, then made as many turns as I could so that it'd be harder to follow me. They chased me about a block or two but quickly gave up. That didn't stop me from sprinting the rest of the way home and making sure to stay out of plain view by hiding behind trees while crossing the street if there were any parked cars that could possibly grab me from the sidewalk. It capsule have just been a misunderstanding and I may not have been in danger, but it still scares me to this day. Snowboarding in Colorado, we were doing laps of the terrain park, and one of the jumps was getting a bit big for the landing, hitting it quite slow and you'd end up landing at the very bottom of the landing. My mate and I went over it and I landed on the flat area beyond the landing, and when we were on the lift on the way up, maybe 10 m away from this jump, I pointed it out and said that we shouldn't hit that again because it wasn't safe. Not 5 seconds later this skier comes flying down fast, hits the kicker with good speed, clears the landing, clears the flats and actually lands on the bottom of the next jump's kicker. For reference, this isn't small, maybe 10-15 m or so kickers, 6 of them back to back. He literally lands on an almost perpendicular surface to his direction of movement. What followed was the loudest bone-crunching snap, clean snapped femur, and this sickening, deathly loud, blood-curdling scream. We watched from about 15 meters away, able to do absolutely nothing. By the time we got to the top we notified ski patrol of the incident, and by the time we got to him he was being helped by other terrain park enthusiasts, still screaming. There was one time my sister and we were waiting for the bus when suddenly a man from the other side of the road started shouting at us. He's dirty, dressed in rags, and he looked very unhinged and angry. There were cars passing by but it didn't matter to him as he started dodging them, making his way towards us. Luckily, the bus arrived and we got inside as soon as the door opened. We told the driver to close it immediately and then man arrived, started banging on the door. The driver got the drift and we left. The last thing we saw of him, he was still shouting and running after the bus. Everything happened so fast, we were just in shock for a while. It was scary because we don't know him, but for some reason he just wanted to attack us. Scariest moment was probably when I almost fell asleep at the wheel as I was driving home from my ex's house. I'd pick her up from work on the weekend and then we'd go out, but she'd usually have to be home around 2 to 3 a.m. This one night, I was already really tired, because I had been up since 6 a.m., but I had to drive her home or she'd be in trouble with the parents. I was struggling to stay awake on the drive, 20 minutes each way, but she was still awake and she'd talk to me to keep me up. After I dropped her off, she told me to drive safely and to pull off if I can't make it home and to call her when I'm home safely. I'm about 10 minutes away from my house when it gets to the point where I'm only able to keep my eyes half open at best. I smacked myself in the face a few times to wake myself up and continue the drive home since I'm so close. I'm sitting there occasionally smacking myself while driving home, when I realized that I somehow ended up doing a really shitty parallel parking job on the main street. I had no recollection of driving to this street, it was several blocks past where I'd normally turn to go home, or how I even managed to park the car. It honestly scared the shit out of me, because I was so fatigued that I basically drove on autopilot mode at 3 a.m. with no other cars on the road. Not much memory of anything after I dropped off. My ex decided right then and there that I'd just send her a quick text saying that I'm just going to take a nap in my car. I didn't wake up until 9 a.m. the next morning, and the only reason I was up was the police officer that knocked on my window to check on me. My mom put me on diet pills which made me able to sleep only 1-3 h/day and survive on only 1 cup of clear, veggie soup the entire day. Decided to do this crazy non-stop studying binge where I only slept for 30 minutes and I had nothing to eat except diet pills and Red Bull, had an eating disorder, decided the Red Bull was enough calories. 3 th day, I started hearing stuff. Either some freaky deep voice saying some echoing gibberish I can't make out that turns into freaky laughter, or white noise. I swear I could feel a man in the room, but I figured if it's some demonic presence and I get killed, at least it's a great excuse to get out of exams. Eventually passed out and slept for 27 h. Never again.